This, and then I'll let you know. Is that okay? Or would you rather go now?
Because I've got like
get it out of the way. Go on then.
PowerPoint as well, or is that not possible?
Sorry?
PowerPoint, or is that not?
Oh yeah, sure, of course.
I like pictures.
Brilliant. Just take a moment. Have you got it on email or have you got it on here? This is not actually on. Would you want to get your email first and then you just press on the display?
On.
Yeah. Did you manage to watch the film? Yeah? Sorry? Outstanding. It's good, isn't it?
I really watched it twice.
Yeah, it used to be freely available online. I don't know whether anyone found the link. It used to work and then it didn't anymore, so I know that the DVD...
£3 on Amazon.
Okay. The reason why we're looking at Jacques Vergès is because commonly within an international criminal justice system, the only means you have to talk about any worries you might have that this might be a show trial or politically motivated trial is in the capacity of the defense attorney, more or less, or the defense lawyer. And Jacques Vergès devised sort of tactics where instead of engaging with the usual legal tools of the defense, he would instead put the court on trial, put the prosecution on trial, and was very sort of unique in that. So he used this platform of the trial as a way of highlighting the biases in the system and of highlighting how even trials which are accepted as valid trials, he highlighted how they were also forms of show trials and political trials. So he also volunteered to be the defense counsel for Milosevic, and whenever he died last year I think, but whenever there was a sort of controversial figure who needed to be defended in an international criminal trial, Jacques Vergès basically offered his services because he thought it was important to show that even if the defendant has committed crimes, and that's mostly, he didn't even question that. As the defense counsel, he acknowledged that the defendant had committed crimes, but that these crimes should be seen in the context of politically motivated things. Okay, so we will now hear more about Jacques Vergès from Divine. Thank you.
That's interesting. That's not a problem. It's fine. Hi, my name is Divine, and as you've heard, I was talking about Jacques Vergès in the defence of, of rupture in international criminal law. the presentation is kind of divided into three parts. I'll give a brief introduction of who Jacques Vergès was. In the second part, an overview of the concept of rupture in international criminal law. And lastly, I intend to see how the concept has been sort of received in international criminal law. And I'll talk briefly about my view of Jacques Vergès and his methods of defense. So to begin with, really, who was Jacques Vergès? This is a man, for example, when he was asked if he would defend Osama bin Laden, he replied that, sort of said, as I've said before, I'd even defend George Bush, but on the condition that he pleads guilty, which I thought was quite interesting. So during his legal career, he attracted quite a lot of recognition, and attention for acting as defense counsel for people who were essentially accused of committing mass atrocities or acts of terrorism, and these included members of the FNL, which is the Front National de la Libération in Algeria, which were fighting against French occupation at the time. But what his most controversial clients include the former Gestapo officer Klaus Barbie, the terrorist Carlos de Jacal, and the Khmer Rouge leader Khieu Samphan in Cambodia. So again, who is he? He was born in Thailand. I think he passed away on the 15th of August in 2013 in Paris. So he's a French lawyer, and as you saw before, he's been dubbed the devil's advocate for given the kind of clients that he had. So he was born in Thailand to a French father from the Réunion and a Vietnamese mother. And his upbringing in Indochina, which was under French occupation at the time, is kind of thought to have influenced his career. And as a man who was essentially against colonialism and imperialism, and it's that sense of injustice which he grew up with, seeing people step aside on the streets in Indochina because French people were passing by, which kind of inspired him, at least that's what people think, to adopt the strategy of the rupture and defense. So this kind of leads me then to talk about the second part of my presentation, which is what exactly is that is rupture in international criminal law. So it's a strategy whereby the defense counsel or lawyers they seek to break down the case against their clients by undermining the authority of the court. So here, what they do, instead of using evidence or relying on a plea mitigation, they seek to attack the accusers instead. And an example which I'll come to a bit later was when he was defending Jamila Bouhired in Algeria, who was accused of terrorism. And what he said was that her crimes could not be crimes because essentially she was a freedom fighter, and what she was fighting was colonial brutality, and as a result she can't really be accused of something that the French themselves were doing at the time, which is quite interesting. But then again, in strict legal terms, it's not, the strategy is a failure. Bouhired was convicted, and many others as well, who were with her. In fact, she was even sentenced to death. And then, this sort of leads to the question as, does this tactic actually, work? Some people say no, but what others say is that what he succeeds in doing by using the rupture defense is scoring political points. And he sort of works the media, turning public opinion into his favor. And then a good example of this as well is in Algeria. What happened after Bouhired and other people were found guilty of terrorism was that an international campaign was launched into sort of was launched to stop them, you know, from being executed, and that was a success. We led, and many others were released, and that turned out to be a really important step in Algeria, you know, gaining independence from France. But going the other way is that, you know, while that story was a success, the rupture defense sometimes just doesn't work, and its limitations can be seen when he tried to defend Klaus Barbie. As you can see there, that's a trial in Lyon, and Barbie was an anti-criminal who was accused of crimes against humanity for essentially torturing and killing either Jews, members of the French resistance during World War II in Paris during German occupation, and also communists. And here, you know, the aim of Vergès was not actually to defend Barbie, but what he did was just, you know, to point out French hypocrisy for having the audacity to sort of indict someone who had committed crimes which they themselves committed during the Algerian occupation. Again, you know, it's going back to the whole, you know, it's not really a crime because you are doing, you know, exactly the same thing. But then, you know, the problem here is that which was identified by the French philosopher Michel Foucault, who says that the defense rupture was too bound up within the unique historical context of Algeria, and you can't really use it all the time for every crime that has been committed. And you know, what the Barbie trial did was essentially show that this strategy is nothing but, you know, a U2 argument. You can't really try him because you did exactly the same thing. And I think that brings questions, not only as to whether it's effective, you know, whether it works in the best interests of the, of the accused, but also, you know, on whether it should be used at all in the first place. And you know, it's kind of not difficult to see why some people oppose, such strategies. And you know, whilst, you know, many sort of say that it's good, you know, it challenges certain things. Others are a bit more skeptical, and someone has said that it's not really a defence, but it's more of a political stand than law, and more about self-promotion than safeguarding the interest of the of those you represent, which I thought was a bit unfair, but that's one way of looking at it. But you know, in my view, and you know, this goes to the last part of my presentation, I think that I do accept the criticism. I think that has some sort of tract in it, but I also think that his work should not be underestimated. In the previous seminars, in this module, we talked about the idea of history in criminal trials, and in particular, we saw how certain things are left out of the international criminal narrative. We saw that in criminal trials, history, as written by the victors, essentially, may not necessarily portray, may not be a full or a true portrayal, of certain events or certain conflicts. And I think this is where the work of Vergès becomes important, because it challenges that narrative, whereby the history of events, like I've said before, is told from the victor's point of view. So, for example, many question why he will defend a person such as Klaus Barbie, but some Jewish historians of the Holocaust, they've kind of hailed his exposure of French wartime collaboration, because the French collaborated with the Nazis, and the Barbie trial actually at the time in France was a really important moment, because after his work, many people kind of realized that what happened during World War II was not black and white. It was a really complex situation where some people resisted, others collaborated. They saw much of the bigger picture, which I thought is quite good. And also the whole idea of short trials. What Vergès said, and I think in one of his interviews, he showed contempt to the fact that at the time The Palais de Justice in Lyon was essentially built for the trial, for the cameras, essentially, for the spectators. And the trial was nothing but a show to make Barbie an example and potential, as a way of France coming to terms with its past by attributing some sort of blame to one man, Barbie, other than the country itself, which is not as innocent as many believed at the time on France's role during World War II and the extermination of Jews at the time. And it's quite interesting that one person has said that he did not bid for the ferocious counterattacks launched by Jacques Vergès. The prosecution will have walked away from the trial with nothing more than the conviction of a man already twice condemned to death by French courts, which is essentially what the trial was, because Barbie had been tried and he'd been found guilty in absentia. So the trial was nothing but a short trial, and I think it's quite important to have defence lawyers who can sort of challenge that narrative and put out a different view of events. So thank you for your attention, those who listened, and if you've got any questions, go ahead. Probably won't be able to answer them.
Thank you. Thanks. Any questions?
So what's your position on Rupture defense?
It's quite an interesting one. I think when that person made the point that it works in certain contexts, but in others it doesn't. And I think with a closed Barbie, it just doesn't. You can't just say that two wrongs don't make it right. Just because France did so and so in Algeria does not make war closed Barbie a big deal at the time. And I think there are also questions as to whether should you actually compare atrocities or violations of human rights. They're all different. What happened in Algeria is completely different to what happened in France at the time. But I think in general his he means well, by what he does. He's got certain beliefs, and he puts them forward in a passionate way. I quite like him.
You say he means well. Do you think he lacked legitimacy, given that he slept with his clients?
Given that he
slept with his clients.
Clients is a plural.
Did he lack legitimacy because of it? Should he have been struck off?
Well, no, because I think when he married Jamila Bouhiedji was after the trial, so I don't know.
What about Magdalena Cup?
Oh, God, did he as well? I don't know. I don't know if that happened, but if it did, then.
Just asking your opinion. Or it's just like you said, you think he was doing good, or just thought it's better? What's your definition of good?
Okay, thanks so much. Because I'd like you to think a little bit more about the trial of Rupture. The very last seminar is actually a little mooting exercise where I'd like you to, I'll give you more details when it gets to that point, where I'd like you to pretend you are actually engaging this technique in a courtroom. And there are very few international criminal lawyers who would subscribe to this technique, of course, because it's very risky, it's politically extremely risky. And there was, shortly before he died, I didn't realise it was 2013, it was already so long ago. Shortly before he died, he was invited to give a talk at SOAS with Marty Koskaniemi, actually, who is the author of the piece, and with who else? I can't remember. So it was sort of really going to be promising to be a really, really interesting talk. And then instead, because he couldn't make it because he was already sick at that time, they invited Stephen Kay. And Stephen Kay is sort of this super straight British establishment barrister who does defence work at international tribunals as well. And the whole event was so flat and so boring because he basically said, the toolbox is what the law provides. So if my client has extenuating circumstances in any kind of way, then that is reflected in the sentencing. So that's all, the only room he had for manoeuvre. He saw himself as having for manoeuvre in order to show that criminal trials are set within a social, political and economic context which don't necessarily capture the true problems at stake. So the whole event collapsed completely because it was clear that what most of the 99% of the barristers do, the defence counsel do, is that they say, okay, my client is guilty, but then there are these and these circumstances, so I suggest that the sentence should be reduced by so-and-so. And that's then what happens. And that satisfies no one, because the victims, they're usually not happy because then someone who has committed these atrocities gets 10 years or something in prison, and it doesn't satisfy the prosecution because they think that someone who has committed these atrocities should have a longer term, and so does the public, and it's all sort of all tied up in this unsatisfying framework of a criminal trial. Well, then what Jacques Vergès tried to do was really think outside of that framework, think outside of that available toolbox. So one of the defence counsel who has practiced, for example, at the Cambodian court, he wrote about how he was frustrated by the processes there and so on, and the furthest he got in demonstrating his unhappiness, and was immediately called out by the judge, was to have a badge on his gown which said, "I heart Dada." So he was then, like, he was referring to Dadaism as sort of chaos and anarchy and whatever, with that, trying to express the fact that he thought what was going on in the court was not all that it seemed. So defence lawyers don't have a lot to play with in an international criminal tribunal. So if anything, Jacques Vergès should be lauded for his creativity and his freedom, also his sense of freedom in just setting all of that aside. However, certainly an aspect of self-promotion is as Divine said, is clearly given. He loved the limelight, and in the film you can also see he loves being interviewed and talking about this, and but at the same time I suppose he's attracting attention to something that's quite important. But I think also he mostly saw those he was representing as tools within a greater cause. So they were, in a sense, dispensable. Although, certainly not when it came to his wife. And his real cause there with Algeria was, as Divine said, showing the hypocrisy of the French in portraying this ordered legal system of reason and meanwhile committing atrocities through an extremely repressive and violent regime of colonialism. So we'll see how that mooting goes. It's the first year that I'm doing this, so we'll see whether that works out. But we'll think more about the details when it gets to it. Okay, so certainly what we know by now is that law is political, even if law presents itself as non-political. And often this presenting as non-political is the political act of those in power. Yeah? So depoliticization is a political act itself. So let's think about Marty Kotkaniemi's show trials piece. It's a standard piece that everyone who's critical of international criminal law refers to it. Written in 2002 as well, so quite a while back, and already being able to, even before the International Criminal Court had opened its doors for business, Marty Kotkaniemi had already put his finger on what the main limitations of international criminal trials would be and are. And in a way, all the problems that the ICC are those which he had already diagnosed by that point. So it's very interesting just from that perspective how astute he was, and I'm sure you've come across Marty Kotkaniemi before in your studies of international law and know about this this perceptiveness that he has. So the first thing that Marty Kotkaniemi wants us to think about is why law? Why law when we think about mass atrocity? And why does it seem like such an obvious choice to us? Why is it that courtrooms and lawyers and gowns and whatever, all that theatre seems to make sense, seems to be the common sense approach? And what he's there referring to is the question of legalism and how legalism is presented as the natural way of responding to crises. Now, have you read Judith Shklar for any other courses? Judith Shklar, it's a bit difficult to say. Shklar. So what I
S-K-A-A-R.
S-H-K-L-A-R. So what I wanted to do was for you to have a quick read. Oh no, where is it? The version I had just now was really
Von Schach, I was thinking.
Sorry?
Von Schach, I was thinking.
Oh, there we go. Now it's working. Can you read this? Okay, so this first paragraph. What is legalism? It is the ethical attitude that holds moral conduct to be a matter of rule following and moral relationships to consist of duties and rights determined by rules. It's not easy reading. Like all moral attitudes that are both strongly felt and widely shared, it expresses itself not only in personal behaviour, but also in philosophical thought, in political ideologies, and in social institutions. As a historical phenomenon, it is, moreover, not something that can be understood simply by defining it. Such a morality must be seen in its various concrete manifestations, in its diverse applications, and in the many degrees of intensity with which men in different places, conditions have abided by it, men and women. I may add. It is, in short, a complex of human qualities, not a quantity to be measured and labelled. Legalism, so understood, is thus often an inarticulate but nonetheless consistently followed individual code of conduct. It is also a very common social ethos, though by no means the only one in Western countries. To a great extent, it has provided the standards of organisation and the operative deals for a vast number of social groups, from governmental institutions to private clubs. Its most nearly complete expression is in the great legal systems of the European world. So, with your neighbour, I'd like you to discuss this, sort of with these 1.5 paragraphs, and apply that to international criminal law. What does this mean? It's not easy to understand, because it calls into question exactly that which we take for granted. So I'd like you to discuss what Judith Shklar means by legalism and what her main concern is about legalism. So if you're not listening, do you want to maybe discuss with Anna? Lastly, it has also served as the political ideology of those who cherish these systems of law, and above all, those who are directly involved in their maintenance, the legal profession, both bench and bar. No one has such a stake in us conducting ourselves according to rules in society than the legal profession. Yeah? They're the biggest stakeholders in this. Their life depends on it. The court of law and the trial according to law are the social paradigms, the perfection, the epitome of legalist morality. They are, however, far from being its only expressions. So, from a legalist point of view, courts and trials are the epitome of how life is to be conducted and to be monitored. Our rule, the following of the rules are to be monitored. But there are also alternatives. There are other ways of conducting yourself in society. Indeed, they are inconceivable without the convictions, mores and ideologies that must permeate any society which wishes to maintain them. Yet the spirit of legalism is not now and never has been the only morality among men and women, even in generally legalistic societies. But she says, then she goes on to say, that our imagination in the Western world is so hampered by the fact that this is our common sense of conducting ourselves, that we are incapable of coming up with alternatives. And this is where ideology is so important. It has become common sense to think in a particular way, which means that those who drive the common sense and who profit from it are extremely powerful. Aidan?
Kind of Gramsci, suppose hegemony, not like ideology becomes common sense. It sort of defines everything that we think about, and the way we live and the way we make choices and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Gramsci says this about so hegemony and ideology interrelated, in that hegemony is the way of talking about ideology, which says that the hegemon, those who are decision makers, and not only in the legal profession, this has, according to Gramsci, has so wide an ambit that it concerns all cultural aspects as well, and also, according to Shklar, that we are conditioned to think in this way. And those who are repressed by that system also think that it is the natural way. So this is where those who don't benefit from the system don't have the opportunity to rise up against it. And now we can also see Jacques Vergès in a slightly different light. in that he didn't take the legalism aspect for granted. He said this is a way, courts are a way of the legal profession and those who have a stake in it playing out their power. So I'm going to interrupt that. That's the rupture, right? The interruption of this in a spectacular way of showing how this is all a theatre, how this is all about setting up power structures. So this is the most intense way of thinking about law as being political. Okay, so Shklar on legalism. Does that make sense to you? Kat?
It's just really interesting what says, you can talk about the courts being the epitome of law. It's more like the last stop, isn't it? It ignores the benefits of the law, which is legal certainty, which is how trade and the world develops.
Yeah, but seeing legal certainty as the benefit is also a way, again, of hampering our imagination of what else could be there.
Well, the market is the imagination. The market develops new ground.
Absolutely. This is and this is a way of introducing the market into it, because it's saying that this is about competition. This is about power and about resources and about material power, right? The legal profession benefiting, because the more we need the legal profession, the more the more we need law, the more the legal profession benefits from that. So it's an invitation to see that which we take for granted as something which is political, which is ideological, and it's an invitation also to imagine imagine alternatives. Okay, so international criminal law has taken this idea from the domestic. This was pre-international criminal law when Shklar wrote it, and has then applied that to the international sphere. And what's so interesting about ideas which have come from the domestic and then applied to the international is that often in the domestic sphere they are seen as flawed. The criminal systems in Western Europe are generally seen as problematic, but nevertheless those who have a stake in it still suggest this system as one to be applied to the international sphere. And so that's what Marty Koskenniemi is drawing attention to, and he says that in international criminal law this is a particularly interesting question because we are talking about crimes, we're talking about conduct which is so goes so against the grain of what society accepts that it's actually outside of the confines of what law can deal with. There must be something else that can deal with it. But our imagination is so inhibited that we only think of it in terms of what law can do. So that's why he opens with this quote from Hannah Arendt, which is a very famous quote in which she says that this Nazi crimes transcend and destroy all legal order. Legal order doesn't make sense in terms of these crimes because the sentence is never enough. The whole theatre is never enough. Whatever comes after that as a legal response is insufficient. And Hannah Arendt already got a sense of that. And so then the quote that follows is Karl Jaspers, who was her PhD supervisor actually, but also lifelong mentor, wrote to her and said something other than law was at stake here, and to address it in legal terms was a mistake about the Eichmann trial. So this sort of makes us think, take a massive step back from the whole idea of international criminal law. So Marty Kosciuszko then says, well, but there are still some possible benefits to trials. What are the possible benefits? Or what are the alleged benefits? If it is accepted that a trial can never be enough, what might it still be there for then? I think we've already touched upon this.
Yes, like the truth out, you find out the truth in situations.
Yeah, the problem, of course, then with truth-telling through trials is
Its reason for being is not the same anymore. It's not to do with justice anymore. It's to do with
possibly, yeah. So it's about history telling, about sort of the didactic purpose, and that means the purpose for teaching us what is right and wrong. Nazi crimes were wrong, and so the trials help society to understand what is right and wrong, and re-entrenches a certainty which might not have been there. But what's problematic with that, then Gramsci?
One truth of a possible many truths.
Yes, one truth, and often the truth of those powers who have been victorious. So in Nuremberg, it was the truth of the victorious powers of the Allies. In the Eichmann trial, it was the truth of the Israelis who had set up the trial. In the Kosovo in the tribunal, in the criminal tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, it was the truth of whom? Of NATO and of those who were basically those who were opposed to the Serbs. So, sorry? Yeah, one of the political parties, yeah. So, even that didactic purpose is in a way flawed because it leaves out alternative truths and alternative ways of writing history. So if we then compare that, we'll come back to Marty Kosciuszko, if we then compare that to the new Kosovo tribunal, did you get to read the blog contribution by Mark Kirsten? What's the Kosovo tribunal? According to Kirsten, what is it trying to do?
Set up a trial members of the Kosovo Liberation Army who were the victors and who were accused of gross violations of human rights that were committed against ethnic minorities.
Yeah, so that's the KLA, sorry, that you were just referring to, Councillor. Yeah. Okay, so there we've got then an effort to rewrite history. The ICTY, in a way, was problematic because it still showed this bias. And now there's this new tribunal which will again correct some of those biases. What do you think of that? Do you think that's a positive thing, that there's this new tribunal in The Hague? Particularly if we think in light of what we said about tribunalisation last week.
It's unusual because if you look at trials, show trials in particular, usually about the dominant ideology that's attacking whoever. But here, what we have is the victors being attacked. So instead of being a regional thing just for that country, you have the international law, which is saying, well, we're the dominant ideology and we're going to prosecute you.
Yes, good. So I was just going to say, it's still about ideology, and it's still within the framework of legalism. So we haven't actually managed to, we're writing another truth, but we're not writing one which is outside of the dominant ideology, because the dominant ideology is one of legalism, which is part of liberalism, which enables the market logic and neoliberalism. But also, if you do think in terms of the market, then this is a typical way of, this is a typical idea of expansionism, right? So there's been one court, and that's seen as being problematic, and so a new one is created, and more law is created, and more legal professionals are brought in, and the Hague group of international lawyers grows and grows and grows, and jobs for them, there are more jobs for them, and then there are more restaurants which cater for the tastes of those international lawyers, and there are more English-speaking theatre productions, and so on. And The Hague, as this global justice provider, grows. And what we have is an additional story, rather than one which breaks out of that pattern. So Mark Caston is quite positive about this, and says it's quite good because it's one of the first times that it's not the victors who are deciding, who are writing history, but this time it's actually putting the victors on trial. But it's still very much within that logic of legalism, which Shklar describes. So what do we then understand as show trials? Now, last week we heard from Cal about the first Stalinist show trial against the 45 engineers?
1928.
Sorry?
Sorry, what's the
The engineers?
53 engineers.
53. That was the first show trial which Stalin had set up in order to demonstrate power, in order to concentrate power, and in order to demonize any kind of capitalist idea of production. So, what does Marty Kotkaniemi say about show trials? And how far are international criminal trials also show trials? What do you think? Or what do you think, where is the boundary when it becomes a trial, when a trial becomes a show trial? What has to happen?
For it to be a show trial, is in trials where the accused is not allowed to speak, and often the side of the truth that is heard is not the accused's side. So if the accused is not allowed to speak, I think that is what was said in the article, then it has the characteristic of show trial. Okay,
and under that definition, international criminal trials are not show trials because the accused can speak.
Are you asking if that is what I think it is, or is that what?
Yeah, that's the extension of what you were saying. So do you agree with that?
No. International criminal tribunals can also be show trials.
In which way?
I'll just go back to the Kosovo example. One of the biggest sort of red flags that is coming up is that in as much as the KLA is going to be prosecuted, that's great, and it's perhaps the starting line for confronting show trials, but then it would only be successful if the international community that was aiding the KLA is also looked at, namely NATO and the United Nations mission in Kosovo, because they are also responsible, although indirectly, some of the crimes that the KLA members were being are being brought up against them. So even though it's an international criminal tribunal, it still can't be a show trial because perhaps NATO and the United Nations mission in Kosovo might not face any form of retribution.
And then, yeah, Divan.
I was just going to go back to something, and I'm not quite sure whether relates to this. When Jacques Vergès was referring to the Kosovo trial, and he said at the time that there were about 40 lawyers, and just on the other side, and they were all essentially repeating the same thing. The Holocaust happened, this happened. And he said that even those who were representing the victims did not talk about how the victims died, what the suffering was, and it was just a question of saying, this man did this. Rather than actually, providing justice for what happened. And I'm not sure whether that's an example of the show trial.
Yeah.
Could we say that trials are often show trials in that they seek to individualise certain criminal actions and tend to ignore structural political reasons why certain crimes occur in the first place?
Absolutely. So that's the extension of what Brian was saying, that the structural problems can't be put on trial in a criminal trial, and so you could say there are always show trials also in the reaffirmation of the existing order, in that the existing order is upheld through the possibility of punishment if you don't adhere to that structure, to whatever it is that is making the rules. So, according to Shklar, all trials are show trials because they are all within the confines of one particular ideology which is reasserting itself again and again. Does that make sense? Blank faces. That's the argument. Anyway, for you, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. You might feel that there is a certain point at which a political trial turns into a show trial, or where a trial, despite the problem, the ideological problems, is still necessary. So, in a way, what then Rupture is presenting is an alternative between, and the article is called Between Impunity and Show Trials. That's what comes between. Because if you say all trials are bad, then you have to be arguing in favour of impunity. And that can't be the end of the story either. Yeah? So, if we say, if we recognise that African states want to withdraw from the international criminal justice system, and we think that's a good thing, or some might think that's a good thing, then the alternative is not necessarily impunity. Yeah, there has to be there have to be alternative ideas of accounting for the problems which have occurred. And Jacques Vergès, in a way, is suggesting an alternative. So he's saying, we accept that we've got these courts, and we accept that we've got the trials, and we accept that they're the expression of a particular ideology, and they uphold the status quo, they uphold the power of those who already have power. But we're going to use that to our benefit. We're going to exploit that to show the hypocrisy of the powerful and to show that the powerful are setting up these courts in order to sustain their power. Okay, what is it about international criminal trials that makes them particularly apt as a show trial? I mean, that's sort of obvious already. What is it about international criminal trials that's so that's almost an invitation for a show trial?
That is something from Victor's Justice, in which the sort of the people who came out as victors in the particular perpetrations that they're being accused of are the ones who are either instituting proceedings or who are sort of making the accusations. As the examples have been given, for example, given in the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, that only prosecuted the Hutu perpetrators of the genocide and left all of the others.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Victor's Justice issue, what else makes them particularly useful to consolidate power?
The inclusion of so many people.
Inclusion of so many people. Yes?
It's like it's got a broad scope, so that's why it becomes popular.
Yeah, the popular element. Was that something that you were going to say, Rick?
I was going to say that they already have an idea of what they think the truth is. There's already that presumption of guilt, and so that just makes, from the offset, what are you actually finding out, because you already assume you know something's happening.
Yes, that's such an important point here. International criminal trials are often set up through the presumption that that individual will be guilty. And at the International Criminal Court, so far there has been one person acquitted, but the assumption is that that person who is the defendant will be guilty. Too many resources have gone into it, too many efforts have gone into it, and in fact, the prosecutor has often already, before the trial has even started, spoken about the crimes that have been committed. Not allegedly committed, not allegedly committed by that individual, but the definitive act of that individual committing those. So the question of the presumption of innocence is very problematic in international criminal tribunals, and also then the fact that international criminal tribunals are set out for the world's media. Nuremberg, the first time that a film was shown in a courtroom, ever, the reporters came from all over the world and were invited to watch the trial and to describe it and to write home on it. The first trial in history which was ever televised was the Eichmann trial. Every effort is made to underline the message through various visual media, through public relations efforts of these courts. So that makes them also particularly strong tools for injecting ideology and for spreading the word. So, Gary Simpson, show trials then are not at the outer limits of legality, but rather mark revolutionary departures from it. So is that, I mean, Gary Simpson then is saying that actually show trials mark revolutionary departures from the norm. And in a way it's opposed to and in contrast to what we've been saying from the perspective of Shklar and legalism, because Shklar says it is the common sense way of conducting trials, is as a form of show trial. So strategy of rupture then. What would the strategy of rupture, a strategy of rupture look like in the International Criminal Court? Or maybe discuss this again with your neighbour or in smaller groups. If you were defending Dominic Ongwen, who is on trial at the moment at the International Criminal Court, former child soldier with the Lord's Resistance Army under Joseph Kony, if you were his defence counsel and you wanted to adopt this strategy of rupture, which Vergès practiced, what would you do? For Dominic Ongwen, and it's your turn to make an opening speech. Everyone makes an opening speech. The prosecutor goes first. Usually very colourful opening speeches by the prosecution. And the defence makes an opening speech, and so does the representative of the victims. What would you do in your opening speech? What did the two of you discuss doing?
We will make the guilty defense.
You'd make, yes, okay, so you would say the defendant is guilty.
Yeah.
And then?
And the guilty should be reduced.
Okay, so the guilt reduced how?
For example, before is 50 years, but I want to defense to reach 25 years.
Okay, well, that's not really the strategy of rupture, because that is the sentencing that we were talking about. That's the way it would usually happen. That's how a defence would usually go about taking the political and the social and the economic context into account. So that's what the defence would usually do. But how could you break out of that? What might you say?
I will to prove this person is a good person.
Yeah. Is Dominic Ongwen a good person though? This is sort of part of the dilemma, isn't it? Because we're not trying to get our defendant off, because we know that our defendant has committed terrible crimes, and we need to acknowledge that as well. This is not about innocence at all. This is about a guilty party, but perhaps guilt being laid upon this person through not only their actions. Some of it is though their actions. Some of it is choices they made which were bad, which were wrong. Do you want to, what did the two of you say about it?
We kind of found an article that was saying that what was happening in Uganda at the time when the RRA was doing whatever, it was that the Ugandan government benefited from
the referral to the ICC?
yeah, because they were essentially helping the ICC from, and then that meant that the West could then intervene in the conflict.
Yes.
And that suited their needs as well.
Okay, good. So this is then how you would start setting out. So how do you set out the hypocrisy of the ICC? One way of doing that within this case would be to say, this was a self-referral by Uganda, which delegitimized the rebels, Dominic Ongwen being part of them, and helped the Ugandan government then be viewed in the international sphere as having legitimate power. But at that time, this was exactly what the question was. Who has the legitimate power? The rebels or the government. And international law has historically big problems with this because it just sort of de facto takes for granted that those in government would be somehow legitimately in government. It's very sort of practical in that way. And so you would show that there can be a moral disjuncture in that the government also committed crimes, and that the ICC is then being hypocritical because it is helping to shield those who have committed crimes, because those are considered, the LRA are already considered as the enemies, and the government are already considered as the goodies. Okay, so you might start out like that. Anything else? Indra, do you want to add anything to that? Who else thought of any? What did you two talk about?
That what actually might have been a victim himself.
Yes. This is actually what the defence is doing. The defence is saying that Dominic Ongwen was also a victim because he was a child. So how do you, when he was enlisted in the LRA in the first place, how would you go a step further, though, in showing the hypocrisy of the ICC? Not just by saying he might have a defence because he was a child at the time, but how would you go a step further to make this a trial of rupture?
I don't know. I mean, could you talk about problems on the African continent generally, the amount of problems that exist because of structural realities that were caused by past relationships with Britain, France, and other countries, help to sort of cause a massive host and web of problems, one of them being pretty much persistent conflict between different ethnicities because of artificial borders and things drawn by states, Western states who had really no knowledge of Africa at all whilst they were doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So that would be the sort of the argument of neocolonialism would be one of the way of rupturing the trial. What else? What did you talk about, Levin?
Yeah, we were just saying about the fail of the state on the child soldier, but we didn't really link it to the ICC and found it quite hard to.
We talked about the failure to protect the child in the first place. So the life of violence became normalised. There was no moral boundaries for him. Because they failed to protect him, he was taken by the LRA. This is your life, this is what you did. There's no right or wrong with it. That's normalised behaviour, so you have to mitigate it because of that. Yeah, also, absolutely. Also, a possibility of saying, well, the element of rupture would there be to say, well, while these problems were going on in Uganda, you didn't intervene then, and so this is how this cycle of violence became part of everyday life there, and how children became part of it. But also in terms of just sort of the children aspect, in law, this is provided a real dilemma for the legal profession, because children are generally seen as immune from any kind of punishment because they are so impressionable, because they need to be protected and so on. So the question of immunity for any kind of actions then changing on the day someone turns 18 is itself problematic. But for example, in the conflict in Sierra Leone, all children were seen as immune, and in fact, if you want to go further on the immunity question, then you could say, well, South Africa, for example, built up its constitution on the premise that those who had committed crimes would
be given immunity, because it was seen as more important that society, that there's a new trust in society and that it's able to re-establish itself, and that those who were key in the apartheid system, many of those who were key in the apartheid system, should not be made criminally accountable. This was the way forward. Very similar to Northern Ireland as well, of creating peace there. So you can sort of, in a trial of rupture, you would show the hypocrisy of deeming some set of criminals as immune for the purposes of peace, and then others not, and whose interests, again, that serves. What about, oh sorry, did you have a question about that?
That's the question, yeah. But again, you know, from a legal point of view, to what extent is it beneficial to your client?
Yeah.
Essentially just say, the court is, you know, hypocritical, and you know, and also, if the referral was by Museveni at the time in Uganda, how can then Africa turn back and say, you know, we are being targeted when the ISIS itself is being used by some African leaders to, for political gain, essentially?
Yeah. So,
I'm not sure if
two really good questions. What was the first question again? Short-term memory.
Yeah, you know, how does it help?
How does it help your client?
Yeah.
Not at all. It does and it doesn't, because you acknowledge that your client has done bad things. This is not about their defence, and so you're using your client. This is what's seen also as possibly morally reprehensible, because often it's connected to a larger struggle, and where your client has a useful position for that larger struggle. Yeah. So it doesn't help them. It might help them that they feel vilified in there, but I was caught up in things that I didn't know I would be caught up in. But it doesn't help them in legal terms at all. Yeah. The question of, so this is often, when it comes to the question of withdrawals from the ICC, this is usually 90% of the debate is about it's to shield dictators, and they wanted this in the first place. They referred their own situations. And it's the ICC which is being used. It's not the ICC which is then sort of an imperial institution. And of course this goes, this depends on how far you go in analysing the root causes of problems. So yes, Uganda thought it was very convenient to refer its situation to the ICC, because it therefore deemed the LRA as these enemies of humankind, and it helped then legitimise its own power in government. However, the ICC also, and the prosecutor at the time, also quoted Uganda and said, you know, there was famously, I think it was in the Torqueva piece, isn't it? A delegation from Uganda went to The Hague, and they were dined and wined and sent on boat trips and things like that. And it was clearly set out what would be of advantage to them in referring the case to the ICC. The ICC needed a case. They didn't have a case at the time. So it suited them quite well that there was then a country which said, we're referring our case to you, go, work. And of course then, it's also the question in how far we got there in the first place, which has to be seen on a case-by-case basis. In Uganda, having been a former British colony, and therefore already being in a relationship of dependency on various levels in terms of development aid, in terms of the building up of local elite, in terms of contracts, and so on. So you can see various dependencies which are already there prior to the referral between Uganda and the Western powers. So it really depends sort of how far you go. So I think it's too, and often this is what the ICC position is. The ICC position is, we don't have an anti-African bias because they keep referring their cases to us. They want us to decide on their cases. This is their whole public relations. That's where it ends as well. That's what they say. We don't have a bias because, look, we're getting our cases from them. But that's problematic in that, again, it closes off the debate. So a trial of rupture might open that up to discussion as well, much as Aidan said, sort of set out the historical dependencies which have been part of the establishment of the courts in the first place, but also part of those powers who are seemingly benefiting. You might, to draw a trial of rupture is also very much about drawing attention, about sort of getting the world to look in a different way, to turn things around. And so it's likely that someone practicing this technique would say something about George Bush, just to sort of get the attention of the media. That always gets the attention of the media. And certainly Jacques Vergès referring to George Bush was very calculated, knowing that would get him the attention there. So yes, that's the trial of rupture and show trials. Now it's not come out very well, has it? I don't know whether it's better in the handbook. Rosa Luxemburg and her lawyer, in a way, very early aspects of this trial of rupture already. Rosa Luxemburg was a revolutionary Polish-born who then lived in Switzerland, went to Germany, and was politically involved and therefore had many enemies, and was in prison many times. And her lawyer and they decided that they would not defend her and her actions, but they would use this as a platform. Again, knowing that media was there, knowing that she was a public figure, would then use this as a platform to tell their story. So they didn't really defend her. And in fact, when she was younger, she politically active, she was often bailed out by friends and family, and she had sort of a circle of people who were supporting her, and this drove her mad. And she said, don't do this, don't bail me out, I need to, it needs to be seen what is done to me, and I can't benefit from this system because that would make my point so much less effective. Anyway, Red Rosa is a fantastic graphic novel by Kate Evans, and it so happens that Kate Evans is actually going to be giving a public lecture and talking about her work and explaining it with the use of some of the images from her book at the University of Liverpool. And I'll send out details of that in late April. And she's just great how she presents, and she's very talented. And it turns out that a lot of these themes that she's been working on, of rupture and so on, she didn't really know that they had such a link with international criminal law and with questions of justice and so on. So yeah, that should be a really good talk, which I hope you can attend. Anyway, so any questions about show trials and rupture? Yes.
So do you think international criminal law is all bad?
All bad? No. Do I think personally? No, I don't think it's all bad. I think there are some aspects to it which are very useful, and I think that without international criminal law, we probably wouldn't have all those efforts at documentation, and I think those efforts at documentation are a good thing. So when we think about Syria and the crimes which are undoubtedly happening there, it's impossible at the moment to refer the situation in Syria to the ICC because of the political allegiances in the Security Council, because Russia and China are blocking that. It seems mad to me that international criminal law is still stating that it is not political in the face of incredibly political action. But I think that it's problematic in that I think part of what is happening in Syria is that, or what is not happening in Syria is because of the frustration of the international community of not being able to set up a tribunal, or not being able to refer the situation to the ICC, and so that's leading to massive delays because that isn't possible. So international criminal law there is part of the problem, but it's also part of a good thing in that, because there is the hope that there might be some kind of criminal trials, who knows whether that will happen or not, and who knows whether they will be effective or not, but because there is the hope of that, there's incredible amounts of documentation happening. So all of these different stories and all of these different ways victims of the conflict are suffering are set down, and even if they're conflicting stories, and even if they don't include the whole picture of all the political allegiances, surely that documentation for the purposes of trial must be a good thing. So I don't think it's all bad. I think, but I think that it's very difficult to think of alternatives. But I think it offers us a platform to think about alternatives. So yeah, it's not a very satisfying response, I'm afraid. And I also think that there is something in this idea of rupture. So this NGO who's now saying Australia are committing war crimes, it's a way of really drawing attention to things, or even in regards to Palestine. The case is probably never going to actually go before the court, because there are just too many political powers which are preventing that. But it is allowing the Palestinian people to have some kind of expression of the injustices, and I think that is, even if it's flawed, that is a good thing. As always with international law, it's part of the problem and part of the solution, but it's often only portrayed as being part of the solution. But I'll be interested in your thoughts on international criminal law at the end of the course, and whether your thoughts have changed, or whether maybe this is causing you to think it's absolutely necessary that we have the ICC, and that that it's a necessary institution, and I respect that position, of course, that you can still make up your own minds. Next week we will be talking about international crimes, and zooming in on the question of what is an international crime, what is considered as an international crime, and why are certain crimes not considered as international crimes. And we'll be thinking about that aspect, which I think is the most interesting aspect of the whole debate. And I'd like you to think about that as well. If war crimes, crimes against humanity, crime of aggression, genocide, if they're accepted as the core crimes of international criminal law, which crimes are not considered as international criminal legal crimes, and why? So maybe you can have a little bit of a a think about that for the coming week. And then if there are no other questions, then I'll see you next week.